So let's take a look at the Photoshop document, and this is where I ended up, okay? And this really does look like a painting. It really feels very painterly, and it is somewhat abstracted, yet it also is representational. And as much as I don't want you to, use text, this is a little different because the text is unreadable and it's meaningless, but it gives you the sense um, of degradation and decay, and that is part of the feeling of this. And it was part of the original picture, and I didn't use it specifically for the text. So um, it's not like it's something that you can read that is telling me what I'm supposed to think, right? Okay, so one of the things that I would probably want to look at first is I'm going to drag this down to the very bottom. Sometimes I'll keep original files here, and basically, just to make a note, all of these eyes are turned on except for that one, and you'll notice that this one just right in this area sort of desaturates it a little bit, and I was sort of on the fence and I couldn't decide which way I liked it better, so I just kind of left it there. But if we turn all of these things off, let's just turn all of the eyes off. And let's just start with the beginning, right? So we had this gear image. And one of the things that I had done was when I placed the eye in there, and if you look at this eye, the luminosity right now, or the blend mode is set to luminosity. So if I were to just put it on normal, you would see that that's what it looked like. So I placed it as a linked item, right? Because if you don't do it as linked, then you potentially will screw up the resolution later. So I did linked so that I could scale it, and I had to monkey with it a little bit. And if you want to just lower the opacity, I had to sort of like figure out where I wanted this thing to go. And actually, hold on, let's turn that off because this original one is in a different location. So if I turn this gear on, okay, let's turn on, yeah. So let's turn this gear on, and you can see that this is masked, but it originated from this one, okay? And so what I did with this eye copy is that I scaled it and I sort of squished it a little bit to make sure that the iris was fitting approximately inside of the space of this. And one of the things that was really important is that I kind of needed to match the pupil up a little bit to this interior gear portion. Okay, and if you look at the original, one of the things that you'll notice is that you can see here where the mask is pulled out. You can see that it originally did actually have, it's actually kind of interesting, it looks like a double exposure. You can see that gear really does have metal inside of it. And so that was something that I decided to mask out also so that I could end up, let's do this, so that I could end up having the pupil show through so that it would actually start to really look more like an eye, okay? And then the other thing that I ended up doing, and that's really basic, you should know how to scale and use the free transform tool using Command T to make this the right shape and size that you would want it to be. All right, and then I started playing around with some other stuff too, and I think before I started putting these copies on, the other thing too that I went ahead and I did is I put this layer on, and I went ahead and created a mask. In fact, if I do, let's just duplicate this so that you can see really quickly sort of what I ended up doing. Let's throw that mask away. Okay, and so what I ended up doing is I took this layer, and if you go down to the layer mask icon, and you hold down Alt or Option, you can add a solid black layer mask. And right now I can't really see anything, right? Okay, well, I could just start by selecting this. I could just start with my paintbrush and just start, let's make sure it's on white. Whoops. And I could just start removing material, but I don't know what I'm removing, right? So I don't want to do it that way. I actually want to, let's go back to my history. Okay. What I actually want to do instead is I want to jump into quick mask mode, right? And if this is the button for quick mask, and what it allows me to do, instead of using my quick select tool, quick select is not going to give me the selection of subtlety that I want here. So if I go into quick mask mode, what I can do is I can take my paintbrush and oops, and I want my foreground actually to be black in this case, and I can start painting in the stuff that I want to disappear, right? And if you use your brush, you know, you use these big soft brushes, you can adjust the hardness and the size. You can also, of course, adjust the opacity so that you could see how my other one just sort of very gradually fades in, right? So you could get a lot of this big stuff done, and then if I wanted to increase my brush size, right, I could go to I could hold down Control Option or Control Alt, and I can drag it to the right to make it bigger or drag it to the left to make it smaller. And so I want to make it bigger for right now. And if I were to drag it up or down, you see that I increase the hardness of the brush as well. Okay, so anyway, so now I've changed my brush size and hardness, and I can just sort of start to, you know, get rid of some of this stuff. And I can get rid of a lot of it you know, just kind of very easily here. And right now my opacity is at 100. And, you know, so this is kind of the approach that I took. And then when you start getting into some of this stuff, this is where you want to lower your opacity and you can start to build in your layers. You know, you don't want to like completely get rid of everything possibly. And I need to get rid of, I think I ended up getting rid of the ampersand. I don't really remember, honestly. And then some of this I think I got rid of because it was digging too deep. In fact, I know I got rid of most of the B, for instance. And so you can just sort of start painting in like this. And then when you're done, you can get out of quick mask mode, right? And then you could go ahead and either just immediately apply your mask, right? Like this, or you could go ahead and save the mask if you wanted to, right? And then you can adjust if you want. But I can do this, but if let's say that I didn't like that and I wanted to go back in more, all I would need to do, since I didn't technically save it, what I would need to do is go into my channels and I need to select the painted wall copy mask, all right, that I just made, and I would turn the eyeball on, okay, and then this is where I could start to go back and edit. Okay, and so and because I have my opacity turned on really low, I might want to turn it up some, right? And also the other thing too is that you can't really see it very well here because it's on top of opacity, right? So it's on top of something. I probably don't want it in there. I probably don't want the letters showing up in there. Okay, and so this is, then I can go and turn it back down and we can sort of lightly get rid of some of this stuff, right? And so you can kind of see that that I can still continue to adjust. I can continue to adjust this if I want to, right? And so then if I take that back off again, you can see what is showing, all right? And I already had it the way I wanted it, so I'm actually going to get rid of this layer and I'll just show you how this looks, okay? And so you can see I kept some of the wall texture to kind of start blending this in to where this gear kind of starts jutting out. And then I realized, okay, well, my picture kind of gets cut off here. I want color and texture underneath there. And so what I did was I duplicated the eye, and by the way, this eye has also has opacity turned down. And then I also duplicated it and I flipped it so that it would give me this sort of really fleshy color back here, okay? And then this one, I had it turned, I think, to luminance. So let's go ahead and, or luminosity, okay? And so you can see that I've got some of these things starting to come together and it's starting to look a little bit painterly. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that all of these gears, they have a lot of different shaped masks on them. And I did those a number of different ways. To first do it with the main gear, this gear down here, which I can't see because everything's on top of it. But here, let's turn this stuff off. Here, let's just turn the big one on. All right, so what I did was, first of all, this original gear, I went ahead and I made it less blurry. And so I actually went in and I sharpened it, but really, really significantly. And so just to show you, So if I want to show you right now, I'll go up to filter and sharpen, and I'm going to go to Unsharp Mask, and let's do it. And then these are the settings actually that I used at the end. Your settings are probably not going to be that radical, right? And so you can zoom out and you can kind of get a little bit of a better picture here, but you can also zoom into certain detail, like if you have this, you know, you can blow this up more. But I thought that that was a kind of a good place to start, because remember, this is painterly, right? It doesn't matter if it's got some degradation in there, as long as it still looks the way I want it to look, right? And so I went ahead and I applied that, and then after I applied that, I started to make my selections. I'm not going to do that to the original. Actually, I'll just go ahead and turn this back on. But what I ended up doing is taking my quick select tool and making a selection, and it did a pretty good job, but then I had to go and clean a bunch of stuff up in some of these areas. Like for instance, like that's pretty obvious, but in some of the places like around here, what I needed to really do is I needed to blow it up a lot. And kind of come in and fix my selections, sometimes using a combination of tools, not just quick select, but maybe switching over to polygon, lasso, and then you know, excluding by holding down Alt or Option, you know, and then kind of figuring out the shape of some of these. And I didn't get too fussy about it, but I did want to kind of have it be, you know, pretty clean, right? And so anyway, I made my selection, and I'm not going to walk you through all of that. This is something you should know how to do from the exercises, the practice lessons. All right. But after making selections, I saved a number of different ones. And if you go into channels, you'll be able to see the different ones, right? So you see that we've got my main gears, and you see that it has both gears and it cuts all the rest of the machinery out. Okay. And then I've got gears without iris. Now you might be wondering, like, how did I get the iris in there? Okay, well, what I did was it was a lot easier to actually just create an oval with my marquee tool, right? And I created an oval. I saved that selection. I called it Big Oval. And then to get this little part for the pupil out, what I did was I made a separate selection of the pupil, and I put a feather on it. You can see it's sort of soft here. And then what I did was when I loaded this selection, let me just actually show you really quickly. What you can do is go load selection, and we'll actually do Big Oval first. All right, and then if you go back to load selection again, I can choose interior oval, which would be this pupil, and instead of just saying new selection, I'm going to say subtract from the larger one, right, from the existing selection. All right, and so now that gives me an iris, and then I saved that selection. You'll see that I saved it as the iris. Okay, and so once I had that, I could then subtract it by loading gears, right? Let me show you. Okay, so I could go up here to load selection. I could load gears. Okay, and then I could go to select, and then I could load the selection, and subtracting this time, subtracting the iris from it. Okay, and that gave me the gears without the iris. And then this was easy right here to just go and mess around with if I needed to later. Okay, so that's how I created my selections. All right, all these complicated selections. They're not that complicated actually. So anyway, let's go ahead and start layering this back up again, and I'll show you kind of the rest of my process here. So I had and the other thing too that I did, you'll notice, is that let's just turn this guy off for a minute, and I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, and then I've already explained how I built these layers up. So this is where we were, and I really I felt like this part of the gear, this foreground gear, was getting too lost, and it was just too soft and blurry in here. So what I did was I went and again I created another selection where I isolated just that gear, and I could bring that gear forward to the front so that it would be a lot heavier. Okay, and then if you see here, it has an overlay blend mode. All right, this one has multiply on it. And so I used a lot of blend modes here. This one is normal. paint effect out here. That's normal. Okay, and so that takes us up to where I was at a certain point, and I said, you know, this looks good, but I think that I would really like to have this iris have some color. And so I decided to bring this picture in, which is covered right now, but it's the picture of water, right? It's that picture, very saturated. And I brought that in, and I decided, first of all, just to pull out the iris. Let's see if I can open this up. Let's see. Not that one. Okay, and so this is where I ended up putting the iris mask on it. And this guy, if you look here, has a hue blend mode. If I put no blend mode, this is what it would look like. Okay, and I felt like that was just overkill. It was just too much, right? It kind of like really messed up the sophistication, I think, of the rest of the piece. And so what I did is I decided to play with different blend modes, and I played with all this different stuff, and I really still wanted it to look like an eye. I didn't really want it to look like water, although it could have been interesting. It's sort of like you're looking in someone's eye and you're seeing a different landscape. That's a natural landscape. I sort of thought that could be interesting. That just blew it out too much. It also puts weird colors that aren't really the color of an eye. Anyway, and so I went through all these different options. Overlay was actually kind of interesting. Yeah, it was hue. All right, and I felt like that was a pretty good representation, and it like had a really nice gradual fade. And so that one worked well for me. But then I decided that I thought it kind of looked interesting to have more texture, like from that image, sort of coming through this gear with that. And it's that water. But what I did here is I put the gear mask that I'd already created up here for the gears copy. I put that same mask on there so that it didn't go into the eye. And then I thought that this pupil was just too black and it was too flat. And also the way that the edges looked, I didn't like that. So I ended up doing yet another thing where I created this gears mask, right? And so I thought that this was starting to build up really kind of interesting texture. And then I wanted to make everything a little bit more vibrant, but not too much. And so I added a vibrancy layer. You can see the skin tone really starts to pop out. Okay, so add that. And right, and that's just and I put it on top of all of these things that are inside the eye. Okay, so it's affecting everything that's underneath it. All right, and then finally I thought that this over here, the paint, it felt a little bit just a little too obvious. I want it to be a little more textural. So I went and I added this, and I created a mask to just only include the left edge, the left crusty edge. And so we end up getting a little bit of this knockback so that this doesn't feel so white and so bright, unlike the rest of this, right? So it sort of starts to recede, and I lowered the opacity, and I also gave it a blend. Oh wait, no, I didn't. Yeah, no, I didn't give that one, but I did lower the opacity. And still, I thought that it could use a little more texture, and I thought that this picture of the water would be a really nice ripple effect without it being one of those Photoshop filters. Sometimes the Photoshop filters work great, and sometimes they're just, you just read it as a Photoshop filter. And so I'll literally just placed this linked file in exactly the same size, and I lowered the opacity to 27%. And that actually was something that I felt like it really had this sort of decay, this really natural feeling that was sort of fighting with this sort of old time looking machinery that was sort of grinding into what looks like a person's eye. You can still see the eyelashes. That was really important to me.